Welcome back. This is the 26th segment of Making Sense for 7 Minutes, a summer-long series, Monday through Friday, where we are surveying in bite-sized pieces our historical narrative as recorded in the Bible. And, as always, asking the immeasurably relevant question, so what? The events recorded in the Old Testament close out in 445 BC, with the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt under the leadership of Nehemiah. And Israel, now a small country, is struggling for survival in the ancient Middle East. 400 years then lapse until the events of the New Testament begin to unfold. And although these are often referred to as the silent years, they were not uneventful nor inconsequential in as far as our understanding of the historical narrative of the Bible is concerned. These 400 years, also referred to as the Intertestamental Period, start out with the Persian Empire being dominant in the region until 331 BC, when it was conquered by Alexander the Great, who at the time was 24 years of age. Now, Alexander was not only a military genius, he was also the most famous and the star pupil of the philosopher Aristotle, who was the star pupil of Plato, who was the star pupil of Socrates. Now, Aristotle had this consuming passion for unity. He wanted to discover the unifying elements in science and philosophy, and Alexander shared this passion, only he extended it also into the things of culture. And Alexander began the process which is known as Hellenization, the Greekifying of the known world. And this is why, ultimately, the New Testament was written in not Hebrew or Aramaic, but Greek. So, Alexander conquers in 321, but he then dies in 327 BC. And the empire is eventually broken up into two factions. One is the Ptolemies, and the other is the Seleucids. The Ptolemies conquer Israel in 320 and keep them for about 2 decades, until the Seleucids come along and conquer, and they put on the throne in 198 BC. Antiochus, did I pronounce that right? Antiochus III. Now, Antiochus III had a passion for Hellenization that surpassed Alexander's, and he starts pressuring the Jews. So the Jewish culture is beginning to be eclipsed, but there are a number of groups that surface in resistance, and one of them is the Pharisees. They work and they are zealous at preserving the culture and the law and the covenant of their people. Now, by the time that we run into them in the Old Testament, they have disintegrated into a bunch of self-righteous, externalistic hypocrites who oppose Jesus. But at the outset, they are righteous dudes. Then, in 175, another Antiochus comes on the throne, Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, an epiphany is a manifestation. Antiochus Epiphanes was considered a manifestation of God. He was also demented. And he implemented some horrible anti-Jewish laws. For example, observance of the Sabbath, circumcision, and the possession of any Hebrew scripture were considered capital offenses. He'd kill you. But in 167 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, his grossest sacrilege for the Jews took place when he had a pig sacrificed on the sacred altar in the temple. And this brings about, with the increased persecution, a revolution in 164, the Maccabean Revolution. Judas Maccabeus becomes a national hero because he wins the religious freedom for the Jews, reopens the temple, which is such a huge thing that they had this celebration, which is still observed every December, the same time of year, Hanukkah. Then in 142, the Jews get their full freedom until 63 BC, when Israel is conquered again, only this time by the Romans, under the leadership of Julius Caesar. Now, in 40 BC, a local puppet king is appointed, Herod the king, over the Jews. And he creates a dynasty, but he is also very cruel and very vicious. Two of the men who were mainly responsible for Herod receiving this post were Octavius and Mark Antony. Now, Mark Antony of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Octavius is going to become known as Caesar Augustus, who, of course, we know about from the New Testament. It is in the middle of all of this that the events of the New Testament begin to unfold. And it begins to give you a hint why in the New Testament the life and the times of Jesus are described as taking place in the fullness of time. I'm over time. Thanks, y'all.